Right, okay, let's do it. Hello and welcome to an AVForums video overview of the Tannoy Turnberry GROW loudspeaker. My name is Ed Selly. I'm the hi-fi editor for AVForums. You've seen a couple of these now, I hope. I'm slowly but surely trying to get more comfortable in front of the camera. I'm still clutching at my jumper and generally being uncomfortable in front of the camera, but we're making stately progress. Now, I think that a number of people looking at this video are going to be inwardly or outwardly saying, oh no, not more retro revival tat. We don't really do existentialism on AVForums. It's not a big part of what we do, but I put it to you, is a product retro if it's never stopped looking like this? Because that's what the case is here. This is not something that has been kicked back into life because there's a sudden interest in products from a bygone age. Fundamentally, they've never stopped looking like this. This is not so much a retro product as a sort of equivalent, like a sort of coelacanth with a tweeter attached to it. So principles that go into its construction date back over 70 years. What are those principles? They are centered around this driver. Tannoy calls it dual concentric, and it does largely what it says on the tin. What their major innovation back in the day was to use the essential flair of the driver to horn load a tweeter mounted centrally. This doesn't sound like great shakes in the 21st century, and plenty of companies do it. It was quite a big deal back then, and it has to be taken into account that because this tweeter is horn loaded, you're not just saving on a tiny little sort of tweeter-sized hole that you would find in a modern loudspeaker. You were saving on a fairly substantial piece of carpentry. You killed two birds with one stone, and at the same time as you killed those birds, you gained some other performance aspects because both of these drivers are now operating as a sort of synergistic whole. It's been sufficiently successful that Tannoy has never actually stopped doing it since. Sure, some of the affordable models don't use dual concentric, but that's for price reasons. The moment that the company can afford to do it, they still do their drivers this way. In the case of the Turnberry, you're looking at a 10-inch treated paper cone and a 33mm aluminium and magnesium tweeter. Now that extra size, 33mm over say 25mm, it doesn't sound like that much, but proportionate to the overall radiating area that we're talking about here is quite a big deal. And the reason it's quite a big deal is because getting a 10-inch driver to go up too far is going to result in some unpleasant behavioural characteristics, in the same way that asking a 25mm tweeter to get down to a certain point is also going to leave you with some uncomfortable measurements and probably some audible issues as well. By increasing the size of the tweeter, Tannoy can cross over these drivers, I should say, at 1.3 kilohertz, which is actually, when you start looking at it, quite modern. What this means is neither of these drivers is being pushed beyond its design envelope. In the good old days, there were certain large Tannoys that you sat and listened to, and bluntly speaking, there was a bit of a hole between the two drivers that were operating. That really isn't the case here. This is very seamless, very cohesive. Now, also, it is augmented by these flutes you see down the side of it. These are not simply here for decoration and to gather dust, although I suspect they do both of those things reasonably well. They are the porting system for this driver. It doesn't port out over a single point, it ports out over a fairly substantial part of the front of the cabinet. Now this means, one, that even though the ports themselves are quite narrow, they have a fairly wide and large area, which means that they've been completely silent in the time they've been under test. It also means there's absolutely nothing other than terminals at the back of the speaker, and you can, if you want, wedge these into corners or go right up against the wall. You will see on the internet photos of very large Tannoy speakers in very small rooms, quite frequently in Asia and markets along those lines. They seem perfectly happy under those circumstances. This is a large speaker, but it's not a particularly difficult speaker to place. There's some other things as well which date all the way back to the beginning. This is an extremely sensitive loudspeaker. I think, I can't be sure because it requires me to go back through over 10 years of reviews. I think it is the most sensitive loudspeaker I've ever tested for AVForums. At 93 decibels for 1 watt RMS sensitivity, you do not need a very large amplifier to get a very large sound out of these speakers. Now, this has ramifications for the sort of amplifiers that you might choose to use with them. It's probably time to talk about this aesthetic. And some of you who are familiar with my written work will be thinking, oh, well, Ed will love them. Truth be told, even for me, a man comfortable in retro, this is a bit much. I tend to like my styling late 60s, 70s through to early 80s. That's my peak design period. This thing is, with the best will in the world, just a little bit old-fashioned for my taste. It doesn't help the fact, obviously, they are enormous. There is little you can do to prevent these from being the focal point in pretty much any room that you place them in, unless the room is enormous or has something truly dramatic in there to compete with them. I'm not going to insult anyone's intelligence by saying that £8,500 isn't a lot of money, because it is. But you can spend the same amount of money and not get something which is built and finished like this product is. They're not solid walnut. There's HDF inside the cabinet and then it's walnut on top of that. Nevertheless, the standard to which they've been done is it's furniture. And I don't mean furniture that you buy down in a DIY store either. It is very, very high quality. It's been done to an exceptionally high standard. I love the little details, like the fact that you get polish in a tin to look after them for the extremely long period of time that they're likely to survive. This is a different way of doing things. And once again, it's not retro in the absolute sense of the word, because we've not returned to it in this case. It's simply what we've been doing all this time. You do get grills. There is also some footage of the grills on. Don't think for a second that the grills make them look less vintage. I'd argue they actually make them look older. But nevertheless, if you have cats or children, I will bet that the cats probably find the grills very interesting indeed, but they'll stand up to a fair bit of abuse and they'll keep all of this safe, and I suspect this is also pretty robust. One other feature which is quite interesting, which we'll just close out on, is something that these speakers have had for decades, but is now suddenly very of the moment, is that they do have EQ adjustment. Now, it's not the same as whipping your laptop out, getting a USB connection out and interrogating them. But nevertheless, at the bottom of the front panel is the ability to adjust the frequency response round a 700 Hertz focal point. It's not the most ornate set of adjustments going. You basically can go down in 2 increments or up in 2 increments, but credit where credit's due, it actually works exceptionally well. The reason it survived this long is because it's extremely effective. There is more thought and more experience inherent in these speakers than you perhaps first appreciate when you just haul them out of their enormous boxes. I think the reason they win as many people over as they do is because actually they have solutions that a number of loudspeakers don't, and even with sort of a more modern return to EQing, it's still relatively unusual. I also think that sonically, they do an awful lot right. There is an American adage that there is no replacement for displacement. And it's hard to argue with that when you sit and listen to a speaker of this volume with a driver of this size. We've looked at some other large speakers before, both in video and in print. So this isn't unique, but when you cross the size and the scale with the sensitivity, you get something very unusual. This is a speaker that can sound extremely big even when you are running it at late night volume levels, and that's quite a useful thing, and it changes how you appreciate what they do. I found myself with a recent review of a pair of Arundel monitors which were capable of generating similar levels of sort of SPL and scale, that I wanted to just birch them to actually get a sort of visceral sense of what they can do. I didn't find myself having to do that with the Tannoy. It just cracked on, really, and you could use them at any level you liked with pretty much any music you liked, and everything sounded big and confident and fundamentally realistic. Now, there are caveats to that realism. This isn't the most detailed loudspeaker that I've put under test, compared to the resident Kudoses that live here and a number of other speakers that have passed through under test. You will miss tiny little details that they extract from the mix. It's not muffled or veiled, it's just not a design priority of what they set out to do. Tonally, however, they're sensational. They're generally speaking, extremely believable with both voices and instruments. They also flatter poor recordings rather more than a number of other loudspeakers at this price. So if your library is less than note perfect, they're going to let you listen to almost all of it without you sort of wincing and turning anything down. They're also, and this is an interesting one, they're also quite a lot faster on their feet than you might give credit for something that looks like a wardrobe. When I tested another pair of vintage Tannoys quite a long time ago now, the Legacy Eton, I felt that when you really leaned on them and played cretinous dance music, they weren't happy with that. Something has happened in the intervening period in Tannoy engineering circles that this one just picks its skirts up and off it goes. You can be perfectly thuggish with them, and they will deliver a thoroughly appreciable and very entertaining sound. It's not just a device to listen to chamber music, and I think that's part of its appeal. When faced with the question of would I buy one, or a pair obviously, no. But that's because the styling just isn't me, and they are far too large, and for the work I do I like to have two pairs of speakers running at one time, and that precludes it in this room, and so on and so forth. The other caveat to would I buy them is that like all good speaker stories, there's a sort of arch rival waiting in the wings, which is Fine Audio, which is comprised of people, some of whom actually worked for Tannoy before there was a sort of split and all the rest of it. So there's, you know, a good Montague and Capulet story going on there. By being a newer company and not being so tied to their history, Fine has been able to take this design principle in directions that Tannoy is more reluctant to do. We did a review of the Classic 8 loudspeaker last year, and that did things at a lower price with styling that I found a little bit more preferable, that would have me leaning in that direction if I wanted a big high sensitivity loudspeaker. The thing is though, I get it. I really do. There will be people who sit down in front of these for the first time and it will be the last loudspeaker that they ever buy. There's no issue with me saying that and then saying it's perhaps not quite for me. There is an effortlessness, an ability to deliver scale, image, and just a level of musical immersion that is absolutely magnificent. And for a number of people, the way that they look is not an impediment. This is, and I hate using the word unique, it gets misused a great deal, but this is a unique listening experience. And it's one that I've enjoyed a great deal. It's also one that's far less constrained than you might imagine it to be. And for all of these reasons, as we'll cover in the written review, which is on the site, the speaker earns a fairly glowing score as a result of it. You know, I admire the fact that it still exists and it's still winning people over 70 years after the basic concept debuted. It's hard to argue with that, really, and I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with them. If you've enjoyed this ramble through audio history, thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Goodbye.